Hello, hello, and welcome to another episode of Leninhawk Talk, my audio-only, podcasty type YouTube videos because I'm too old to learn another format. I am David Leninhawk, and today's topic is something that I saw going around Twitter on Thanksgiving weekend and thought warranted a little bit of a discussion. And it involves a independent horror movie called Skinamarink, which I assume the title is a throwback to that old children's song, Skinamarink-a-dink-a-dink, Skinamarink-a-doo, that thing. So, I have not seen the film, and most people have not seen the film because it has not been officially released yet. It does have a distributor, and it is set for release sometime in 2023. But it has been screened at some film festivals, particularly virtual film festivals. I believe Fantasia International it's screened at. So what is this film? To be honest, I'm pretty sure it's a film I'm not going to personally like because I'm getting a lot of we're all going to the World's Fair vibes off of it. That was a movie that was very praised by most people who write within the horror community, so reviewers and critics and such. But when I finally watched it, it felt like an unsuccessful tone poem that was sort of maybe a little too obtuse plot-wise, and that introduced a lot of themes but did not explore them. And I have a full review of We're All Going to World's Fair on Letterboxd. I think I only gave it like 1.5 stars. But it was not my thing. I think it was trying to evoke a mood, but it didn't want to do more than that. And Skinamarink seems like it's that kind of movie. It looks like it's very low budget with a very minimal cast. The premise of the film seems to be that there's two children in a home raised by a single father, and the father leaves, and then suddenly all of the doors and windows of this house disappear. And so it seems like most of the film is meant to evoke the feeling of being a child who's afraid of the dark and of being like left alone. And then from what I've read from some of the negative reviews that have come up on Letterboxd, a lot of the film is just sort of static shots of like the wall and the floor with like some ethereal humming sounds, like something out of David Lynch. And I'm not sure if it's black and white or just night vision, but apparently it's just very dark, and sometimes there's like whispers, and it seems like it's mostly this mood-evoking tone poem more than anything else. But chances are I would probably find it to be boring, I'm thinking. But it has gotten a lot of good notices from the film festivals and the official screenings that have happened. But something seems to have happened where copies of this film seem to have been ripped off of the virtual film festival screenings and have made their way online for piracy. And so people have been watching it that way. And I guess it was kind of trending a little bit on TikTok, where people were like clipping some of the more action-packed or jump-scary moments and putting it on there. And then apparently enough people had been pirating it and writing reviews on Letterboxd that it actually ended up in like the top 25 horror movies of 2022, even though it doesn't get officially released till next year. So it seems like you have this independent horror film that probably didn't cost much to make. It's the first feature-length film from this particular director. I guess he did a short film earlier that is of the same type that I have not seen. And you know, it's very important when you're an independent filmmaker, if you actually have gotten lucky enough to produce a movie that has also been even more lucky to get a distributor to be released, that movie needs to make a profit if you want to continue to make movies. But if everyone who's interested in this movie is suddenly pirating it months before it's available through any official means, that's going to cut down on the potential profits of this movie, and then that could potentially hinder the future career of this director. And regardless of what I may personally think of the movie whenever I get to see it, and who knows, maybe I'll watch it and think it's brilliant. Some people have been comparing the film to Eraserhead, and while Eraserhead has more of a plot than this looks like it has, I do love Eraserhead, as most people do, so most people of my particular film taste do. So it's possible I'm completely wrong, and I might like this movie more than I think based on what I've heard and based on the trailer and stuff. But let's talk about this a little bit. So, virtual film festivals are kind of a new thing, and they mostly came about out of necessity with COVID. For the longest time, you've had your basic film festivals where you go to them, and they're open to a mixture of general members of the public who pay for tickets and members of the press who get press passes so that they can write about the movie in different periodicals or whatever they write reviews for, that they're, maybe they do reviews for YouTube, or maybe they're employed by a newspaper or a independent film zine or whatever, or zine, Z-I-N-E. I've always called them zines, but I guess if it's short for magazine, it should be zine. But anyway, like that's kind of the way that goes. But with COVID, obviously, we weren't able to have in 2020, and a little bit further in, too, weren't able to have in-person film festivals for a while. And so some festivals switched to having this virtual option where you basically stream a movie at a certain time. Can't rewind or pause or anything like that, so it is like a full-on screening. And you're not downloading anything. You're just streaming it as is, like any sort of like live event, like if you watch a live YouTube thing, except there's no like VOD afterward. And realistically or understandably, a lot of distributors or studios or filmmakers weren't too keen on this, because they were like, well, if we're streaming something online, chances are someone's going to figure out a way to screen cap this or rip it some way, and then boom, there's a pristine copy of this movie online for people to pirate. And in some cases, these are movies that don't even have distribution. So, the filmmakers who made them, maybe they got a couple investors, and they need to get a distribution deal in order to pay back their investors, or maybe they put the entire movie on their credit card, like old school, like Robert Rodriguez type people, and they're in danger of, losing their house or something if that's how they afforded the budget of their independent film. And so if you have a pirated copy, that's going to reduce the market value of your movie, and so distributors aren't going to want to pick it up because they figure, the audience that was interested in it has already watched it for free. But necessity being what it is, I mean, film festivals are very important for a lot of independent films and even some like lower-end studio films. And lower-end, I mean on budget-wise, not quality-wise. Film festivals, they create hype so that a film you've never heard of could suddenly get attention. The original Saw was a midnight thing at Sundance. Or if it's a movie that already has a distributor, then it might be screened at the film festival in order to pick up like award ceremony momentum. So, you premiere at Toronto or Venice or Cannes or whatever in the hopes of getting, Oscars or BAFTAs later on down the road. So the whole film festival setup is very important for especially independent films, but it's sort of important for the whole film world in general. They're sort of like the primary election if you consider in film's actual theatrical or streaming or whatever release it's general election type thing. It's where a smaller group of people get to look at something and decide how worthy it is or whether it's something worth your attention down the road. And I guess I should talk a little bit about film critic stuff and kind of some nuts and bolts of that. So when these movies premiere at film festivals, generally reviewers can review that movie right then at that point. There's no embargo. There's no limit to when they can post a review after that. It's part of the whole thing with the film festival. And movies can change between when they're screened at a festival and when they finally get a final release. Sometimes directors will add some stuff or they'll trim some stuff. I remember there was the infamous release of the Brown Bunny, Vincent Gallo's film at Cannes that got a really bad reception. Roger Ebert famously gave it like 0 stars and really trashed it for a while. And based on that negative reaction, Vincent Gallo took the movie and re-edited it a little bit, and so the final version that was released differed from the version that screened at Cannes, and it ended up being a movie that Roger Ebert said wasn't half bad when he finally reviewed the release version of it. So things can really change. Sometimes you trim a couple, make things a little bit tighter in the running time and things like that. And sometimes it's just the finished version that's screened as well. But in general, if it's a movie that is just generally about to be released and it's screening for critics, generally the critics they'll get their press screening approved by the studio or the distributor of the film, and sometimes there'll be this embargo, which is like, hey, you can watch the movie, you can write your review, but you can't post it until X date. So it's like, hey, we'll let you see, I don't know, Black Adam a month early, but you can't publish your review until a week before its release date. We cool? So, and technically they can't force you to abide by that. Once you've seen the movie and you've written your review, you could technically post it whenever you want. I mean, freedom of speech and everything. But the thing is, if you break that embargo, that studio is probably not going to give you credentials to watch an early screening of any other movie that they distribute in the future. And so it's sort of this give and take system where the studios will allow you to see a movie early so that you can write a review, and that review is ready for when paying customers are ready to decide if they want to plunk down their money to see that movie. And in return, they have sort of the guidelines of this is when you're allowed to post your review. And sometimes if the studio thinks they have a good movie on their hands and that the reviewers are going to like it, that embargo might be very early, or they might do some lately. It could be, we'll embargo a full review until such and such a date, but anything that you can fit in a tweet, go out and send that tweet. So it's like you can't post a full review, but you can put your 140 comment snapshot of it. They recently did this with Damien Chazelle's Babylon, where the full reviews are still embargoed, but right after the screening, they're allowing people to at least tweet their snap initial thoughts, and that's how we know that right now the consensus is very mixed and polarized on that particular film. And so that's a relatively new with the power of Twitter and social media and stuff. So that's sort of the thing. It's where there's a sort of ethical guidelines, or at least unwritten rules about how reviewers and critics and film journalists can get access to early films and things like that. So I bring this up because with Skinamarink, there was a thing where there was a film critic or film journalist who works for this site called Film Inquiry, which I had never heard of before. I took a look at their site, and Film Inquiry seems to be a very independent film zine of some sort. They have a Patreon to raise money. Their sort of about us like status of the site indicates that they're sort of a very attempting to be a very progressive, non-clickbaity type film website. Seems like a good venture. I mean, you had things like IndieWire and Slash Film and Film Threat, and all of these have sort of morphed into larger things at this point. And it seems like it's attempting to be like a startup version of that. But one of the reporters there, they really liked Skinamarink, and it seems like they originally watched it through one of these virtual film festival screenings. And I don't know if they created the pirated copy or they were just sharing it around, but this particular reporter, or whatever you want to call them, critic or whatever, they originally posted a tweet that was like, hey, if you want to see this, DM me and I'll give you a link. And that seemed, why are you as a film journalist and a film critic who should know that doing that is unethical and hurts the filmmaker? I mean, even if you don't care about the distributor, and it's a small distributor, it's not like Disney bought this movie or anything. It's a small distributor, and so even if you are sort of one of these like Pirate Bay absolutists where it's like no content should ever be paid, art should be free type people, which, I have some sympathy for them, but at the same time, movies are the world's most expensive art form, and they're a business first and an art form second. And if we want to see better movies, or we want to see movies that we like, we have to financially support those movies and those filmmakers. Otherwise, they won't make them, and all we're going to get is MCU movies for the rest of our lives. Hollywood and the film industry ultimately wants to copy previous successes. So if something is not a success financially, whether it was critically or not, or artistically, that doesn't matter. It only matters is that they're going to copy things that turn a profit, and they're going to avoid greenlighting things that don't turn a profit. Then you're hurting the movie if you're linking that. And even I think they eventually got a lot of backlash from the horror journalists who I follow on Twitter, which is like 50% of who I follow on Twitter. So they got a lot of negative that. So they deleted that, but they still had a lot of like conversations back and forth where they were offering to share links to this movie, and then other people were calling this journalist out on them, and he was like kind of going back on them, like, hey, why are you talking about my site and everything. And I don't know, it seemed very skeevy from the journalist's perspective, in my opinion. It just seems like you should kind of know better, especially if, I mean, I don't know if he paid for a ticket to watch this on the virtual film festival screening or if he got a press pass for it, but it just seemed very bad. And, you know, I'm not a professional film critic. I pay for my tickets to go see everything. Some of my reviews have been posted on a website that's kind of like this Film Inquiry. It's called Pixelated Geek. It's run by a couple friends of mine. And while I've never gotten a press pass from them, they are an organization that has gotten press credentials for stuff. One of the few non-movie reviews that I wrote for them, it was a review of an X-Files comic book issue. And basically the publisher of the comic book gave them, you know, a couple PDFs that they could use for review purposes. And so I signed up. I was like, yeah, I'll read this and review it for you. So I did. But that's sort of the arrangement. The publisher gives you these press copies, and you're allowed to read them and then review them. And the caveat of that is, hey, you don't put this PDF on a pirate site, or you don't email it to a bunch of random people who aren't going to be reviewing it, because that would, you know, steal money that they're trying to make from, you know, selling the comic and everything. And so that was like the one like press credential thing I ever did as far as like reviewing something before its release date, based on a press copy. But that's sort of like the give and take of it. And it just, I mentioned the film journalist because they really should know better. Like if you get into film criticism and film journalism, and I looked up this guy, apparently he has, his letterbox said that he has a BA in film studies, which is the exact same degree I have. And so you'd think you'd know how the industry works. And, you know, since he gave this movie like 4.5 stars on Letterboxd, so he claims to really like it. And I saw a recent tweet of him that said, like, hey, I'll definitely buy it when it gets a physical media copy. So great. But how much money are you taking out of that filmmaker's pocket, and how much are you hurting that filmmaker's chances of making another movie by just willy-nilly giving links to watch this movie for free from pirate places? And then the whole thing on TikTok, I mean, you know, a bunch of 14-year-olds who enjoy TikTok, they don't really give a fuck about whether they watch a movie for free or if they pay the filmmakers and distribution company for it. So, you know, and TikTok trends die. I mean, it's a cesspool of ADHD-ness. So, you know, by the time this movie gets its actual official release sometime in first or second quarter 2023, they'll have way moved on. And the only people who are going to be left actually watching this movie in a legitimate standpoint are probably going to be like a handful of like hardcore horror people who are interested in any sort of breakout chances that it had to sort of strike while the iron was hot with the internet memery, or the internet viralness rather. Those are going to be gone, and that's sort of a sad thing. Sorry, but it's just very disconcerting. I mean, I remember when Eli Roth came out with Hostel 2, a copy of that hit the pirate sites like a week early, and he tended to blame the financial underperformance of Hostel 2 on that, and that's why we never got a real Hostel 3. I know there was a direct-to-video Hostel 3 that he had nothing to do with, but I mean like a real one that like he made that's like official and everything, that sort of fits canonically with it. It was a similar thing with Kick-Ass 2, where that also hit the pirate sites early, and because of that, it didn't do well and underperformed, and that's why there's no Kick-Ass 3. Now, in both of those cases, maybe you don't particularly like the Hostel movies and you don't care, or you don't like the Kick-Ass movies and you don't care. And in both of those cases, both of those are sequels that were made by studios, so at the end of the day, those particular filmmakers were fine, and those studios were fine, even if those individual movies crashed and they didn't get to continue those series. But when you're talking about a movie that was made for, you know, maybe a couple grand at most from this independent up-and-coming filmmaker, you are really hurting that guy's chances of making another movie, because if he made this one feature, it, you know, luckily got distribution, but once this distributor actually puts this thing out on VOD or theaters, my guess is it probably won't get much of a theater run. It looks very small and very niche. Well, maybe they change their mind after they see how viral this goes. But, he was lucky enough to get that, but if this movie just bombs and just the distributor doesn't make back its investment, then chances are it's going to be harder for this guy to raise money for his next project, and he might not even get a chance to make another movie, or it might be years later. And so you're hurting this up-and-coming indie horror filmmaker when generally people, especially in the horror filmmaking community, the horror journalism community, we want to prop these people up and hope for their success, even if we don't like their individual movie. Like the director of World Going to the World's Fair, I may not have cared about that movie, or cared for that movie, rather, but the person who made that definitely showcased that they have some talent. And so I'd like them to make another movie, because there's always a chance that I'll like that next one better, especially because, it wasn't some Pure Flix random Amazon Prime piece of shit or anything. It was well made. I just happen to not particularly like the film, but that doesn't mean that they can't make a better film. There's plenty of filmmakers where maybe like right out of the gate they make something bad. I'm not that big a fan of Scott Derrickson. I don't like Hellraiser 5, and I did not like Sinister at all, even though I know a lot of people disagree with me on that. But then earlier this year, he came out with The Black Phone, and I really enjoyed that. So, so just because a filmmaker makes a movie you don't like, sometimes you can still recognize that there's raw talent and that they can make another movie that could be good. Generally, a filmmaker has to make like a few bad movies in a row for me to completely lose hope that they'll make any good ones. Wes Anderson, I'm looking your direction. That's not fair. I do like a handful of Wes Anderson movies. Baz Luhrmann, I'm looking your direction though. I do not like Baz Luhrmann at all. So I've hated every movie he's ever made that I've seen. So it just struck me as odd that someone who works for a film periodical and who has a film degree and reviews and writes about movies seemingly for a living, I assume it's his main job, would do this and like basically throw a filmmaker onto the bus and then try to like call out and shame people who are calling him out for this legitimate way. And so not everybody was calling out this guy in particular, but you saw a lot of people who are pretty regular, pretty well known within the horror community, just kind of talking about how terrible it is that the movie got pirated and everything. And so, yeah, this movie's out there on, all the basic pirate sites and all of that. So I'm not going to watch a pirated copy of this. This isn't, what's the last thing I watched pirated? The last thing I watched pirated was Louis C.K.'s I Love You Daddy movie. And that was because, one, it was pulled from release and there was no sign that it was ever going to get released in the future. And even now, Louis C.K. has come out with, he's directed a completely new movie, 4th of July, that got released. And even though he bought back the rights to I Love You Daddy and could release it directly to his website at any time, he still hasn't. So as far as I know, that movie is still not going to get released anytime soon. And also, I didn't really care about taking money out of Louis C.K.'s pocket since, he hasn't really made good on the people he harassed. So I didn't care if he didn't make money off of that. But that's a lot different from this up-and-coming filmmaker, because even if I end up seeing Skinamarink, and even if I decide, I don't like that movie, unless it's, terrible or morally reprehensible, I would still like to give that person, I would hope that person at least does well enough with their movie that they can go ahead and make something new that might be better, or they might be up my particular alley. Who knows? So anyway, I just wanted to talk a little bit about that because I had not heard about this movie before, and it just seemed really shitty that somebody, either it was someone from the press who got a press pass to watch this on the virtual film festival, or it was a member of the public who paid for a ticket and was able to rip it. Now, it's much like if you try to like screen cap something off of like Netflix or Amazon Prime when you're streaming it on your computer, it'll just come up with a black screen, and the only thing that might come up are like subtitles, because I've tried to screen cap stuff for memes that way and it hasn't worked. So I assume there's similar protections when you try to live stream something from a film festival, but like anything else, there's always ways around that. So somebody found a way to either screen cap it or to rip it, so I'm not sure what the quality of the particular pirated copy is like. But it just seemed really shitty that they would do that to this particular film. And who knows, maybe they did it to everything that screened at that festival, and it's just that this is the one that captured the minds of some TikTok teens. I don't know. But it was just kind of very unfortunate, and ultimately I hope that whatever happens with this film financially, like if it ends up bombing because everyone who's wanted to watch it watches a pirated copy, or whether it only breaks even or whatever, I hope that it doesn't hurt this filmmaker's career, because it is extremely difficult to make a movie, and it is even more difficult to find distribution for that movie so that it gets out in front of people. And it's even harder than that to be able to make a second movie on top of that. So I'm pulling for the guy, and I hope that he's able to make something else regardless. And whether I end up liking this movie or not, I am at least curious to see it, because I want to see what has caused all of the commotion. But shame on that fucking guy who's just like willy-nilly offering to give links to the movie. It's like, that's just really shitty. And I think that anytime something like that happens, it should be similar to when a reporter breaks embargo. Like they should not be allowed to get any press passes for any other festivals or screenings in the future, or any advanced screenings or anything like that. Sometimes studios and distributors, they won't just punish the individual reporter or the individual critic. They'll punish the entire venue. So they in this case they could punish just Film Inquiry in general. But I don't know if they're going to go that far. I believe the distributor is Bayview Entertainment. They're a smaller one. They're like smaller than Gravitas Ventures or Red Eye or any of the ones that are always in front of a bunch of crap you find on Amazon Prime late at night when you're looking for something to watch. But who knows? Maybe it will defy the odds, or maybe some of the horror community that feels bad will rally around and try to watch this movie in a legitimate way. Because there probably are some legitimate reviews, because there are people who did buy tickets to Fantasia and whatever other film festivals this thing may have actually already been released at. So reviews from a film festival are fair game. Reviews off of pirated copies are not. So that's just my 2 cents on that, and I just kind of wanted to talk about it because I hadn't heard about this movie before this whole controversy, and it's just a shame that the only reason it gets on my radar, or a lot of people's radar, is because this unfortunate thing happened that might tank this filmmaker's career, because some assholes want to share the link around. But that's what I wanted to talk about. Let's see. I recently rewatched American Psycho, one of my favorite movies, and so I might do a Dave's Film Faves in the near future on that, because I've been wanting to do another episode of Dave's Film Faves for a while. That's like my on-camera thing. And since I watched that recently, and because I have some personal stories behind it, I think that's a good candidate for me to bring that series back. So I look for that in the near future. But thank you for listening to this little rant, and I hope you all have a good day, and just thanks, everybody. Have a good one.